A pencil falls slowly, hitting concrete. Blood splatters on purple wood. In the silence that follows the gunshot, truth becomes the first casualty. They call it procedure ritual protection. Words created to hide what happens when power meets innocence on an ordinary street corner. This is how they erase children. Not just with bullets, but with language that turns victims into statistics, erasing names from records as easily as washing blood off the sidewalk. Some scars never fully heal. They remain evidence of wounds inflicted and survived, reminders etched into flesh and memory. But scars can speak. And when they speak, the system trembles. The pencil may have broken that day, but it was not destroyed. In the right hands, it becomes deadlier than any weapon, a tool for truth in a world desperate to turn away. This is how justice begins. Not with the bang of a hammer, but with the smallest voice that refuses to be silenced. The golden hour stretched across Maple Street like honey dripping from a forgotten spoon. 8-year-old Nina Thompson pedaled her bicycle through patches of amber light, her laughter trailing behind her like streamers. The purple pencil tucked behind her ear bobbed with each rotation of the wheels, catching the sunlight in small violet flashes. Nina loved the way the world looked at this time of day. Everything seemed dipped in magic, even the ordinary houses with their ordinary lawns. She had spent the afternoon at the public library filling her backpack with books about space and dinosaurs. Her science teacher had announced a special project yesterday, and Nina already knew she wanted to build a model of the solar system where all the planets moved like they should. Her father would help her. He always did. The thought of her father made her pedal faster. Judge Dominic Thompson was rarely home before dinner, but today was special. He had promised to be back early to help her start her project. Nina could already picture them spreading newspapers across the dining table, the familiar scent of glue and paint filling the air as they worked together. She turned the corner only 3 blocks from home now. Isakantwani. In courtroom 7B of the federal district court, Judge Dominic Thompson leaned forward in his high-backed chair, dark eyes fixed on the man standing before him. The courtroom was silent save for the gentle hum of the air conditioning and the occasional rustle of papers. Officer James Sullivan. Dominic said, his voice carrying effortlessly through the space. This court finds you guilty of corruption, evidence tampering, and obstruction of justice. The disgraced police officer stood motionless, his face a mask of contained rage. Behind him, several rows back, his younger brother Eric sat with his hands clenched into fists, knuckles white against his pale skin. Dominic continued, the evidence presented demonstrates a pattern of behavior that undermines the very foundation of justice you swore to uphold. Your actions have not only damaged public trust, but have endangered the community you pledged to protect. He paused, glancing down at the papers before him. Dominic Thompson had been on the bench for 12 years. In that time, he had developed a reputation for fairness and thoroughness. He didn't rush to judgment, and he didn't let personal feelings cloud his decisions. But police corruption cases always hit differently. They represented a special kind of betrayal. I hereby sentence you to 8 years in federal prison with the possibility of parole after 5 years. Your pension is forfeit, and you are permanently barred from serving in any law enforcement capacity. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. James Sullivan's shoulders slumped visibly, but it was his brother Eric whose reaction caught Dominic's eye. The younger Sullivan's face had transformed into something hard and ugly with hatred. Dominic ignored it. He had seen that look before from family members of those he sentenced, from defendants themselves. It was part of the job. Court is adjourned, Dominic announced, bringing down his gavel with a decisive crack. As people began to file out, Dominic gathered his papers. His mind was already shifting away from the courtroom, away from James Sullivan and his brother's hateful glare. He was thinking about Nina and her science project, about the model solar system they would build tonight. He smiled to himself. His daughter's enthusiasm for learning was infectious, her curiosity boundless. Dominic checked his watch. If he left now, he'd be home just in time. Eric Sullivan sat in his patrol car parked at the corner of Elm and Maple. His shift had technically ended 20 minutes ago, but he wasn't ready to go home. The rage that had been building inside him since his brother's sentencing needed somewhere to go. 8 years. 8 fucking years, because some black judge had decided to make an example of James. Eric's knuckles whitened around the steering wheel. His brother had been one of the good ones, a cop who understood that sometimes you had to bend the rules to get the job done. And now his career was over, his life ruined all because Judge Thompson wanted to prove something. The sound of childish laughter cut through his thoughts. Eric looked up to see a young black girl riding her bicycle down the street, her smile wide and carefree. Something about that smile, that freedom, made his blood boil even hotter. While his brother faced years in prison, these people's children rode around without a care in the world. Eric's eyes narrowed as the girl drew closer. He noticed something purple tucked behind her ear. A pencil or something else. His mind, already poisoned by rage and prejudice, began to twist what he saw. The girl's laughter seemed to mock him personally. Her casual happiness felt like an insult to his family's suffering. Eric started the engine. Warren Ellis sat on a bench near the corner of Maple Street, his weathered hands wrapped around a paper cup of cooling coffee. Most people avoided looking at him directly. The telltale signs of homelessness made them uncomfortable. His beard was unkempt, his clothes worn but clean. The military surplus backpack beside him contained everything he owned in the world. 15 years ago, Warren had been a combat medic in Afghanistan. He had patched up wounded soldiers under gunfire, had held dying men as they called for their mothers. He had returned home with medals he never looked at and nightmares he couldn't escape. Then he had lost his daughter, Alicia, to police violence during a mental health crisis. She had been 17, confused, scared. The officer had claimed she had a weapon. It was a hairbrush. After that, Warren had simply disappeared from his own life. His marriage crumbled. His house was foreclosed. He drifted, carrying his daughter's memory and his medic's instincts with him wherever he went. Today, Warren watched the little girl on the bicycle with a sad smile. She reminded him of Alicia at that age, full of life and potential. He took another sip of his coffee, savoring the normalcy of the moment. Then he saw the police cruiser slowly pull alongside the girl, and something in the officer's posture made Warren's combat-honed instincts flare to life. He set down his coffee and reached for his phone. Nina was humming to herself, mentally cataloging the colors she would need for her planets. Jupiter would be the trickiest, all those swirling bands of orange and cream, and that famous red spot. Maybe her father would know a technique to make it look right. The sound of a car engine drawing alongside her broke her concentration. Nina glanced over to see a police cruiser keeping pace with her bicycle. The officer inside was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Nina slowed her bike, uncertain. Her parents had taught her that police officers were there to help, but something about this man's eyes made her stomach tighten with instinctive fear. "Hey!" the officer called through his open window. "Stop that bike right now." Nina obediently applied her brakes, bringing the bicycle to a complete halt at the curb. She placed one foot on the ground to steady herself, her heart beginning to race. Had she done something wrong? Was she not supposed to be riding here? The officer, Eric Sullivan, according to his nameplate, stepped out of his cruiser. His hand rested casually on his holstered weapon as he approached. "What's your name, little monkey?" he asked, his voice carrying a harsh edge that made Nina flinch. Nina Thompson, sir." She answered, her voice small but clear. She had been taught to be respectful to authority figures. "Thompson?" Eric's eyes narrowed. "Any relation to Judge Thompson?" Nina nodded, a flicker of pride breaking through her fear. "He's my dad." Something dangerous flashed across Eric's face. "Is that right?" he said softly. Then louder, "What's that behind your ear? Show me your hands and take it out." Slowly. Confused, Nina raised her hands and carefully removed the purple pencil from behind her ear. "It's just my pencil, sir, for my science project." "A pencil can be a weapon," Eric said, taking a step closer. "Were you planning to use that as a weapon, girl?" Nina's eyes widened in genuine confusion and fear. "No, sir, it's for drawing. I'm making a solar system with my dad tonight." "With your dad?" Eric repeated, his voice flat. "With Judge Thompson." Across the street, Warren Ellis had his phone out, now recording. Years of witnessing systemic injustice had taught him the value of documentation. The officer's body language was setting off every alarm bell in Warren's head. The way he loomed over the child, the deliberate intimidation in his stance. Warren had seen it before, right before things went terribly wrong. "I need you to get off that bike," Eric ordered Nina. "Now." "But I'm almost home." Nina protested softly, glancing down the street towards safety. My mom is waiting for me. I said off the bike! Eric shouted, his face contorting with sudden rage. Nina, startled by the outburst, scrambled to dismount. In her haste, the purple pencil slipped from her fingers, clattering to the pavement. She bent to retrieve it. Don't move, Eric yelled, drawing his weapon with practiced speed. Hands where I can see them. Nina froze, half bent, her small hands lifting in trembling surrender. I'm sorry, she whispered, tears beginning to well in her eyes. I just dropped my... The gunshot cracked the peaceful afternoon in two. Nina fell backward, a scream tearing from her throat as white-hot pain exploded in her knee. Blood bloomed against her skin, spreading quickly across her light blue jeans. Her helmet cracked against the sidewalk as she fell, splitting into pieces. Warren was running before his mind fully processed what had happened, phone still recording in one hand. Stop! He shouted at the officer. She's a child. Eric Sullivan turned his weapon toward Warren for a split second before seeming to register the phone. His face shifted from rage to a calculated blankness. He holstered his weapon and grabbed his radio. Dispatch, this is Officer Sullivan. Shots fired at the corner of Maple and Elm. Armed suspect African-American attempted to flee after brandishing a sharp object. Suspect neutralized. Requesting medical assistance. Warren reached Nina's side, his medic's training taking over. The girl's face had gone ashen with shock, her eyes wide and unfocused. Blood pooled beneath her injured knee, too much blood for such a small body to spare. Hey, sweetheart, I've got you, Warren said gently, stripping off his jacket to create a makeshift tourniquet above the wound. You're going to be okay. Nina's lips moved, but no sound came out. Her gaze drifted to the purple pencil lying inches from her outstretched hand, now splattered with her own blood. Stay back, Eric ordered Warren, his hand returning to his weapon. Step away from the suspect. She's a child, Warren shouted back, continuing to apply pressure to Nina's wound. She needs immediate medical attention. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Warren looked directly into his phone's camera, still recording in his free hand, and spoke clearly. Officer Eric Sullivan just shot an unarmed 8-year-old girl for picking up a pencil. This is happening at the corner of Maple and Elm. Her name is Nina Thompson. Warren turned his attention back to Nina, whose eyelids were fluttering dangerously. Stay with me, sweetheart, he urged. Help is coming. What's your mom's name? We need to call her. Vanessa, Nina whispered, her voice barely audible. Please don't tell my dad. He'll be sad. Then her eyes closed and Warren's heart nearly stopped until he found her pulse too rapid but present. The first ambulance rounded the corner, its lights painting the peaceful suburban street in urgent reds and blues. Vanessa Thompson was chopping vegetables for dinner when the phone rang. She wiped her hands on a dish towel before answering, expecting Dominic calling to say he was on his way home. Instead, a stranger's voice informed her that her daughter had been involved in an incident and was being transported to Memorial Hospital. The voice was professional, detached, offering no details beyond gunshot wound and stable condition. The knife clattered to the floor as Vanessa's world tilted sideways. 20 minutes later, she burst through the emergency room doors, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. A nurse directed her to a curtained area where Nina lay unconscious, her small form dwarfed by the hospital bed. An IV drip fed into her arm, and her right leg was heavily bandaged. Oh, baby, Vanessa whispered, reaching for her daughter's hand. It felt cold, too cold. A doctor appeared at her side, clipboard in hand. Mrs. Thompson, I'm Dr. Patel. Your daughter is stable now. The bullet went through her knee, causing significant damage to the joint and surrounding tissue. We've managed to stop the bleeding, but she'll need surgery to repair the damage. Vanessa nodded mutely, unable to tear her eyes away from Nina's face. Will she be able to walk again? With proper treatment and physical therapy? Yes, though she may always have some limitation, but children are remarkably resilient. What happened? Vanessa finally asked, her voice breaking. Who did this to her? Dr. Patel's expression turned guarded. I understand it was a police-involved incident. There are officers waiting to speak with you when you're ready. Vanessa felt a surge of rage so powerful it momentarily robbed her of breath. Police involved, she repeated. Are you telling me a police officer shot my 8-year-old daughter? Before Dr. Patel could respond, Nina's eyelids fluttered open. For a moment, confusion clouded her face before recognition dawned. "Mom," she mouthed, no sound emerging. "I'm here, baby," Vanessa said, leaning closer. "I'm right here. You're going to be okay." Nina's eyes filled with tears. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but again no sound came. Panic flashed across her face. "It's okay, Nina," Dr. Patel said gently. "This kind of reaction can happen after a traumatic event. Your voice will come back when you're ready." A nurse approached with a clipboard and a small whiteboard with a marker. "For communication," she explained, handing the whiteboard to Nina. With trembling fingers, Nina uncapped the marker and wrote 4 words. "Don't tell Dad, please." Vanessa's heart broke a little more. "Sweetheart, we have to tell your father. He needs to know what happened to you." Nina shook her head vehemently, wincing as the movement jostled her IV. She erased the board and wrote again. "My fault. Wasn't good. Had weapon." "Weapon what weapon, baby?" Vanessa asked, bewildered. Nina pointed weakly to the small table beside her bed, where her personal effects had been placed in a clear plastic bag. Among them was a purple pencil, now broken in half. Vanessa stared at the pencil, then back at her daughter's tear-streaked face. Understanding dawned with horrifying clarity. "Nina, listen to me," she said firmly. "This was not your fault. A pencil is not a weapon. You did nothing wrong." But Nina had already turned her face away, silent tears streaming down her cheeks. On the whiteboard she wrote, "The policeman said I was bad." Dominic Thompson arrived at the hospital 30 minutes later, having been redirected there when he arrived home to an empty house. He found Vanessa in the hallway outside Nina's room, speaking in hushed but angry tones with 2 police officers. "Absolutely unacceptable," Vanessa was saying. "She's 8 years old. She was riding her bicycle home from the library." "Mrs. Thompson, we understand this is difficult," one of the officers replied, "but we need a statement from your daughter about what happened." "She can't give you a statement," Vanessa snapped. "She can't speak right now because of the trauma your colleague inflicted on her." Dominic quickened his pace. "Vanessa," he called. "What's happening? Where's Nina?" The officers turned at his approach, their expressions shifting subtly as they recognized him. "Judge Thompson," the senior officer acknowledged with a nod. "I'm Officer Garcia, and this is Officer Miller." "My daughter," Dominic said, ignoring the greeting. "Where is she? What happened?" Vanessa moved to his side, her fingers digging into his arm. "Dominic," she said, her voice breaking, "Nina was shot by a police officer." The words hit Dominic like physical blows. Shot. Police officer. The 2 concepts refused to align with his daughter in the middle. There appears to have been an unfortunate incident during a routine stop. Officer Garcia began, his tone carefully neutral. "The officer involved believed the suspect was reaching for a weapon." "Suspect," Dominic interrupted, his voice dangerously soft. "Are you referring to my 8-year-old daughter as a suspect?" Officer Garcia had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Sir, I'm just relaying the information as it appears in the initial report." "I want to see my daughter," Dominic said, already moving past them toward the room. "And then I want to see the full report, including the name of the officer responsible." Inside the room, Nina lay still and small against the white hospital sheets. Her eyes were closed, but they opened at the sound of the door. When she saw her father, something like fear flickered across her face before she looked away. "Nina," Dominic whispered, moving to her bedside. "Baby, I'm here." Nina kept her face turned away, her fingers clutching at the edge of the blanket. When Dominic reached for her hand, she flinched. "She's not speaking," Vanessa explained softly from behind him. "The doctor says it's a psychological response to the trauma. They've given her a whiteboard to communicate." Dominic knotted his throat too tight for words. He spotted the whiteboard on the side table and gently placed it within Nina's reach. "Can you tell me what happened, sweetheart?" Slowly, reluctantly, Nina took the marker and wrote, "I was bad. Don't be mad." "Nina, no," Dominic said, his heart breaking. "You weren't bad. None of this is your fault." She erased the board and wrote again. "He said my pencil was a weapon. I just wanted to pick it up." Dominic felt something cold and hard form in the pit of his stomach. A pencil. His daughter had been shot over a pencil. He thought of the model solar system they were supposed to build together tonight, of her excitement about the science project. Nina, listen to me, he said, keeping his voice gentle despite the rage building inside him. You did nothing wrong. Nothing. The person who hurt you is the one who did something bad, not you. Nina finally looked at him, her eyes swimming with tears. She wrote, "He knew your name. He asked if you were my dad." The cold feeling in Dominic's stomach spread throughout his body. "He asked specifically about me." Nina nodded, then wrote, "He got angry when I said yes." Dominic exchanged a look with Vanessa, whose face had gone pale with understanding. This hadn't been random. This had been targeted at him through his child. "I need to speak with the officers," Dominic said, rising from Nina's bedside. He pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. "I'll be right back, sweetheart." In the hallway, Dominic approached the two waiting officers with barely contained fury. "I want the name of the officer who shot my daughter," he demanded. "Now." Officer Garcia hesitated. "Sir, there's an ongoing investigation." "Don't sir me," Dominic cut in. "My daughter was shot while riding her bicycle home. She tells me the officer specifically asked if she was related to me and became angry when she confirmed it. This wasn't an accident, it was targeted." The officers exchanged uneasy glances. "Judge Thompson," Officer Miller said carefully, "the official report states that the suspect, that is the individual, was observed with what appeared to be a sharp object and failed to comply with orders to drop it. The sharp object was a purple pencil for her science project," Dominic said through gritted teeth. "And the individual is my 8-year-old daughter, Nina Thompson. I want to see the official report, and I want the officer's name." "The report is still being processed," Garcia replied. "As for the officer's identity, that information is being withheld pending the internal investigation, as is standard procedure." Dominic stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Let me be very clear. If you don't provide me with that information voluntarily, I will obtain it through other channels. And if I discover any attempt to obstruct justice or cover up what happened to my daughter, I will ensure that everyone involved faces the maximum consequences." Officer Miller shifted uncomfortably. "We understand your concern, Judge Thompson, but we have to follow protocol." "Protocol," Dominic repeated flatly. "Is it also protocol to shoot children for carrying school supplies?" Before either officer could respond, a nurse approached. "Excuse me, but there's a man in the waiting area insisting on speaking with the Thompsons. He says he witnessed the shooting and has video evidence." Dominic's attention snapped to the nurse. "Where is he?" "Waiting room B. He says his name is Warren Ellis." Warren sat in the sterile hospital waiting room, his phone clutched tightly in his hand. He hadn't changed clothes yet. Nina's blood still stained his jacket sleeve and the knees of his pants. He had refused to leave until he knew the girl was okay and had spoken with her parents. The double doors swung open and a tall black man in a suit entered, his face a mask of controlled emotion. Behind him came a woman whose eyes were red-rimmed from crying. Warren stood, immediately recognizing them from Nina's description. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson," he asked. "I'm Warren Ellis. I was there when Nina was shot. I recorded what happened." Dominic stepped forward, extending his hand. "Judge Dominic Thompson, this is my wife Vanessa. The nurse said you have video evidence." Warren nodded, shaking Dominic's hand firmly. "I was sitting on a bench across the street when the officer pulled up next to Nina. Something about his body language didn't seem right, so I started recording." He hesitated, then added, "I'm a former combat medic. I applied first aid until the ambulance arrived." "Thank you," Vanessa said softly, touching his arm, "for helping our daughter." Warren swallowed hard. "I have a daughter too." Had. He didn't elaborate, but something in his expression told them enough. "Nina's a brave girl. She was worried about you both, even after being shot." "Can we see the video?" Dominic asked, his voice steady, despite the turmoil inside him. Warren nodded and pulled up the recording on his phone. The three moved to a corner of the waiting room, away from prying eyes. The video was clear despite Warren's movement. It showed Nina on her bicycle, the police cruiser pulling alongside her. It captured Eric Sullivan's aggressive approach, Nina's confusion and fear, the purple pencil falling, her attempt to retrieve it, and then the gunshot. Nina's scream tore through the tiny speaker, making Vanessa flinch violently. The video continued showing Warren's rush to help Sullivan's radio call, referring to Nina as an armed suspect, and Warren's clear statement identifying the officer and the victim. When it ended, Dominic stood motionless, his face carved from stone. Vanessa pressed a hand to her mouth, tears streaming unchecked down her face. "I've already uploaded a backup to my cloud account," Warren said quietly. "The original is yours if you want it. I know how these things can disappear." Dominic met Warren's gaze, understanding passing between them. "Yes," he said. "I'd appreciate a copy. This evidence needs to be preserved." Warren nodded and began the process of transferring the file. "There's something else you should know," he said as they waited. "The officer Sullivan, he seemed to recognize your name when Nina mentioned you were her father. His whole demeanor changed after that." Dominic's jaw tightened. "Sullivan," he repeated. "Eric Sullivan." Yes, that was the name on his badge. Dominic closed his eyes briefly as the pieces clicked into place. Eric Sullivan, brother of James Sullivan, the corrupt officer he had sentenced just hours earlier. "This wasn't random," Dominic said softly. "He targeted my daughter deliberately." Warren didn't seem surprised. "I've seen enough to know that few things are truly random when it comes to police violence," he said, "especially against people of color." The file transfer completed with a soft chime. Warren handed the phone to Dominic. "All yours. I've got backups if anything happens to it." "Why?" Vanessa asked suddenly. "Why are you helping us like this? You don't even know us." Warren's weathered face softened. 15 years ago, my daughter Alicia was killed by a police officer during a mental health crisis. She was 17. The official report said she was armed and dangerous. The weapon was her hairbrush. He paused, his eyes distant with memory. There was no video evidence. No witnesses willing to contradict the official story. No justice. He looked at them directly, then his gaze clear and determined. "When I saw Nina today, I saw my Alicia, and I promised myself a long time ago that if I ever witnessed something like this again, I would do everything in my power to ensure the truth came out." Dominic placed a hand on Warren's shoulder. "Thank you," he said simply, "for your help and for your courage." Warren nodded. "How is she doing?" "Physically, she'll recover with time and therapy," Vanessa answered, "but she's not speaking. The trauma has silenced her." "She'll find her voice again," Warren said with quiet certainty. "When she's ready, when she feels safe." A nurse appeared in the doorway. "Judge Thompson, Mrs. Thompson, Nina is asking for you." As they turned to leave, Dominic looked back at Warren. "Will you stay? Nina might want to thank the man who helped her." Warren hesitated, then nodded. "I'll be here." When they returned to Nina's room, she was sitting up slightly, the whiteboard balanced on her lap. Her face was drawn with pain, but her eyes were clear. "There's someone here who helped you today," Dominic told her gently. "His name is Warren. Would you like to meet him?" Nina nodded and Vanessa went to bring Warren in. When he entered, Nina studied his face carefully before writing on her whiteboard. "You stopped the bleeding." Warren smiled warmly. "That's right. I used to be a medic in the Army. Fixing people up was my job." Nina wrote, "Thank you for helping me." "You're very welcome, Nina," Warren replied. "You were very brave." She considered this, then wrote, "I was scared." "Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared," Warren told her. "It means doing what you need to do even when you are scared." Nina seemed to absorb this, then wrote another question. "Did you see what happened to my bicycle?" The simple childlike concern amid such trauma made Warren's throat tighten. "I think the police took it as evidence," he said gently, "but you'll get a new one when you're better." Nina nodded, then wrote something else, turning the board so only Warren could see it. "The policeman was angry at my dad, not me." Warren read it, then glanced at Dominic and Vanessa, who were watching the exchange with a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. He turned back to Nina and nodded. "I think you're right," he said quietly, "but that doesn't make what he did any less wrong." Nina erased the board and wrote again, "Will he hurt my dad too?" The question hung in the air, heavy with a child's fear for her parents' safety. Warren took Nina's small hand in his. "No," he said firmly. "He won't hurt your dad, and he won't hurt you again either. I promise." Nina studied his face, searching for any sign of a lie. Apparently satisfied with what she saw, she wrote, "Okay." A doctor entered, then clipboard in hand. "We need to prep Nina for surgery now," he announced. "You can wait in the surgical family area. The procedure should take about 3 hours." As Nina was wheeled away, Dominic turned to Warren. "We can't thank you enough for what you've done." Warren shook his head. "I just did what anyone should do. What matters now is making sure there are consequences." "There will be," Dominic promised, his voice hardening with resolve. "Whatever it takes." Later that night, after Nina's surgery had been completed successfully and she was resting under sedation, Dominic sat alone in the hospital cafeteria, his laptop open before him. Vanessa had finally been persuaded to go home for a shower and a change of clothes, promising to return within the hour. Dominic had used his judicial access codes to pull up Nina's case file in the police database. What he found, or rather what he didn't find, made his blood run cold. The report contained no mention of Nina Thompson. Instead, it referred only to an unidentified juvenile suspect who had displayed aggressive behavior and refused to comply with officer commands. The report claimed the suspect had brandished a sharp implement in a threatening manner, necessitating measured force to neutralize the threat. Nina's name appeared nowhere in the document. Neither did her age, her gender, or the fact that the sharp implement was a purple pencil for a school project. The report had been filed at 5:47 p.m., 20 minutes after Nina had been admitted to the hospital, 20 minutes after her identity had been confirmed, 20 minutes after it had become clear that the victim was the 8-year-old daughter of a federal judge. Someone had deliberately sanitized the report. Dominic downloaded a copy of the file, then checked the system logs to see who had accessed and modified the report. To his frustration, the logs showed only that the modifications had been made from a terminal at the police station with no specific user identified. He was about to log out when a notification popped up on his screen, a new case involving a security camera malfunction. Dominic wouldn't normally have noticed it, except that the location caught his eye, the intersection of Maple and Elm, exactly where Nina had been shot. According to the report, all security cameras in a 2-block radius had experienced a system failure between 5:15 p.m. and 5:45 p.m., precisely covering the time of the shooting. Dominic felt a chill run down his spine. This was no coincidence. The cameras hadn't failed. They had been disabled deliberately to eliminate any evidence of what had happened to Nina. But whoever had done this had made a critical mistake. They had assumed the security footage would be the only visual record of the incident. They hadn't counted on Warren Ellis and his cell phone. Dominic closed his laptop and leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. This went beyond a single officer with a personal vendetta. This pointed to a coordinated effort to cover up what had happened to his daughter. His phone buzzed with an incoming text from an unknown number. When he opened it, he found a single sentence. "Check archived security footage from the previous day. Same location, same time." Dominic stared at the message, heart pounding. Someone on the inside was helping him. Someone who knew what he was looking for. He reopened his laptop and accessed the security camera archive, pulling up footage from the day before the shooting. He watched as the cameras captured the peaceful afternoon at the intersection of Maple and Elm. At exactly 5:23 p.m., the same time Nina would be shot the following day, a police cruiser appeared on screen. It parked at the corner and an officer stepped out, camera in hand. The officer raised the camera, focusing it on something off-screen. Dominic adjusted the view, switching to a different camera angle. From this perspective, he could see what the officer was photographing: Nina Thompson riding her bicycle home from the library, purple pencil tucked behind her ear, exactly as she had been when she was shot. The officer returned to his car and made a call. Moments later, he drove away. They had been watching her, planning, waiting. Dominic rewound the footage, zooming in on the officer's face and the cruiser's license plate. The officer wasn't Eric Sullivan. It was someone else, someone Dominic didn't recognize. But the implication was clear: Sullivan hadn't acted alone. This had been coordinated, premeditated. Nina hadn't been shot because she was in the wrong place at the wrong time. She had been shot because she was Dominic Thompson's daughter, and someone wanted to send him a message. The realization hit Dominic with the force of a physical blow. His daughter was lying in a hospital bed, traumatized into silence because of him, because of his position, because of his rulings. He closed the laptop with trembling hands, bile rising in his throat. In all his years on the bench, he had believed in the system, had worked within it to deliver justice. Now that same system had been turned against his child, and he didn't know who he could trust. One thing was certain: this went far beyond Eric Sullivan and his brother. How far it reached and who else was involved, Dominic didn't yet know, but he intended to find out no matter what it took. As he gathered his things to return to Nina's room, his phone buzzed again. Another message from the unknown number. "They're watching you now. Be careful who you trust." Dominic looked up, suddenly aware of the security cameras in the corners of the cafeteria. Who was on the other end of those feeds? Who was watching him even now? The system he had served faithfully for years suddenly felt like a trap closing around him and his family. And the worst part was that he had no idea how many people were part of it or how high up the corruption reached. For the first time in his professional life, Dominic Thompson was afraid. Not for himself, but for Nina and Vanessa. For what might happen next if he pursued the truth. But the image of Nina's small form in the hospital bed, of her silent tears, and her desperate attempt to protect him by claiming responsibility for her own shooting, hardened his resolve. 3 days after the shooting, Nina Thompson was released from the hospital. The surgery had been successful, but the doctors were clear she faced months of physical therapy, and even then, her knee would likely never regain full mobility. The psychological wounds ran deeper still. Nina had not spoken a single word since the incident, communicating only through her whiteboard or with small nods and shakes of her head. As Dominic carried his daughter from the wheelchair to the car, he felt her small body tense at the sight of a police cruiser parked across the street. Her fingers dug into his shirt, her face buried against his shoulder. "It's okay, sweetheart," he murmured, though he knew it wasn't. Nothing about this was okay. Vanessa walked beside them, her face a mask of composure that did little to hide the rage simmering beneath. Since the shooting, she had taken to wearing a purple ribbon pinned to her clothing, a silent tribute to Nina, and a reminder of what had been taken from her. At home, they had converted the downstairs study into a bedroom for Nina, sparing her the stairs she couldn't yet navigate. Dominic settled her on the freshly made bed, surrounded by her favorite books and stuffed animals. "How's that?" he asked, adjusting her pillows. "Comfortable." Nina nodded, reaching for her whiteboard. She wrote, "Did you catch the bad policeman yet?" The question struck Dominic like a physical blow. How could he explain to his 8-year-old daughter that the bad policeman was protected by a system designed to shield its own? That 3 days after she'd been shot, Eric Sullivan had been placed on administrative leave, with pay pending an investigation that seemed designed to go nowhere. "Not yet, baby," he answered honestly. "But I'm working on it, I promise." Harm. Nina considered this, then wrote, "Be careful." The simple warning from his child, who should have been worrying about her science project, not her father's safety, tore at Dominic's heart. He kissed her forehead. "I will. Get some rest now." In the kitchen, Vanessa was unpacking the medications prescribed for Nina's recovery. Her movements were precise, controlled, belying the storm Dominic knew was raging within her. "The police called while you were settling her in," Vanessa said without looking up. "They want a statement from Nina about what happened." Dominic's jaw tightened. "She's 8 years old and traumatized. She's not giving any statement without our lawyer present." "That's what I told them." Vanessa finally looked up, her eyes hard with anger. "They also said they've completed their preliminary investigation of the shooting. Want to guess what they found?" "That Sullivan acted according to protocol," Dominic replied bitterly. "That he had reasonable cause to believe his life was in danger from an 8-year-old with a pencil." "Got it in one." Vanessa slammed a pill bottle down on the counter with more force than necessary. "They're calling it an unfortunate incident, but justified use of force. They said Nina's failure to comply with officer commands contributed to the outcome." Dominic felt the familiar cold rage rising in his chest. "We have Warren's video. We have evidence that this was premeditated. They can't just sweep this under the rug." "Can't they?" Vanessa challenged. "You've been in the system long enough to know how this works, Dominic. They protect their own. Our daughter is just another statistic to them, another unfortunate incident." She was right, and they both knew it. In his years on the bench, Dominic had seen countless cases of police violence dismissed or minimized. He had tried to be fair, to judge each case on its merits, but the system itself was designed to create barriers to accountability. Now, for the first time, he was on the other side, not as Judge Thompson respected and feared, but as a father fighting for justice for his child against a system determined to deny it. "We're going to fight this." Dominic said, his voice low with determination. All the way. Whatever it takes. Vanessa's expression softened slightly as she moved to his side. I know, but Dominic, be careful. These people shot our daughter to send you a message. What might they do next? Before he could answer, his phone buzzed with an incoming message. It was from the same unknown number that had guided him to the surveillance footage. Warren Ellis is being followed. They know he has the video. Warren sat on his usual bench, watching the world pass by. Since the shooting, he had been approached by several police officers asking about his interference in an official police action. The implication was clear: hand over the video or face consequences. He had refused, stating simply that the evidence had already been given to the Thompson family and backed up to multiple secure locations. If anything happened to him, the video would automatically be released to media outlets across the country. It was a bluff, but a necessary one. Warren had been living on the streets long enough to know that a homeless veteran with a damning video was exactly the kind of problem that could disappear without much fuss. His phone, an older model, but his lifeline to the world, vibrated in his pocket. A text from Judge Thompson. Need to speak with you. Not safe on phone. Meet at St. Mark's Church basement entrance, 7 p.m. Warren pocketed the phone, already planning his route. He'd need to take a circuitous path check for tails and approach the church from the rear to avoid the surveillance cameras he knew were mounted at the main entrance. The skills he'd learned in combat, once used to keep his fellow soldiers alive in hostile territory, were now serving him on the streets of his own country. The irony wasn't lost on him. Maya Wilson had been a staff reporter for the city's major newspaper until 2 years ago, when her investigative series on police corruption had been mysteriously killed by her editors. Rather than accept the censorship, she had resigned and established her own independent news platform, operating on a shoestring budget, but committed to uncovering stories that the mainstream media ignored or suppressed. When her phone rang with a call from an unknown number, Maya almost ignored it. Anonymous sources often turned out to be cranks or conspiracy theorists, but something, instinct perhaps, or just desperate hope for a good story, made her answer. Maya Wilson, she said crisply, I have evidence of a police shooting of an 8-year-old girl, the voice on the other end said without preamble, and a cover-up that goes beyond one bad cop. Maya's journalistic instincts kicked into high gear. I'm listening. Not on the phone, the voicemail, middle-aged, educated, replied. St. Mark's Church basement entrance, 7 p.m. tonight. Come alone. No recording devices. The line went dead before Maya could ask any questions. She sat for a moment, weighing the potential risks against the possible story. If this was legitimate, it could be exactly the kind of case her platform was designed to expose. She made her decision and reached for her coat. At precisely 7 p.m., the basement of St. Mark's Church held an unlikely gathering. Dominic Thompson stood near the center of the room, his presence commanding, even in these humble surroundings. Warren Ellis sat on a folding chair, his weathered face serious beneath his graying beard. Maya Wilson stood with her back to the wall, eyes sharp and assessing a notebook clutched in her hand. Thank you all for coming, Dominic began once the introductions were complete. What I'm about to share involves significant risk to everyone in this room. If anyone wants to leave now, there will be no judgment. No one moved. 3 days ago, my daughter Nina was shot by Officer Eric Sullivan while riding her bicycle home from the library. The official police report claims she was armed and non-compliant. The reality captured on video by Mr. Ellis here shows an 8-year-old child shot for attempting to pick up a dropped pencil. Maya's pen moved rapidly across her notebook. And the department's response: administrative leave with pay for Sullivan, pending an investigation that has already concluded his actions were justified. Dominic replied, his voice tight with controlled anger. But this goes beyond one officer with a grudge. Sullivan's brother was a corrupt cop I sentenced recently, which provided his motive. But he had help. Dominic produced his laptop and showed them the surveillance footage from the day before the shooting, the unidentified officer photographing Nina on her usual route home. This was premeditated, he explained. They were watching her, planning when and where to strike, and afterward the cover-up began immediately. Nina's name was removed from all official reports. She became an unidentified juvenile suspect. The security cameras conveniently malfunctioned during the exact time frame of the shooting. Maya looked up from her notes, her expression grim. A systematic effort to sanitize what happened. Exactly, Dominic confirmed. And I believe this isn't an isolated incident, which is why I need your help. He turned to Warren. Mr. Ellis, you mentioned your daughter Alicia was killed by police 15 years ago. The official report claims she was armed and dangerous when in fact she was having a mental health crisis and holding a hairbrush. I believe Nina's case and Alicia's may be connected by more than tragic coincidence. Warren's eyes widened slightly. You think this is a pattern? I do, Dominic said firmly, which is why I've been digging into past police shooting reports involving minors. He opened a file on his laptop. In the past 5 years, there have been over 300 incidents in this city where minors, predominantly children of color, were injured in police-involved incidents. In nearly every case, the child's name is absent from the official report. They're referred to only as juvenile suspect, or minor assailant, or simply subject. Erasing their identities, Maya murmured, the implications dawning on her. Dehumanizing them. Making them statistics instead of children with names and faces and families? Dominic agreed. When the public hears about an armed juvenile suspect being neutralized, they picture a teenage gang member with a gun, not an 8-year-old girl with a purple pencil or a 17-year-old in mental distress holding a hairbrush. Warren's hands clenched into fists on his knees. So what do we do? How do we fight this? Dominic looked at Maya. Ms. Wilson, I understand your platform is independent and not subject to the same editorial pressures as mainstream media. Would you be willing to publish Warren's video along with the evidence of the broader pattern? Maya didn't hesitate. Absolutely. This is exactly the kind of story I left my previous job to pursue. But you should know publishing this will make you all targets. The department will come after you with everything they have. They already shot my daughter, Dominic said quietly. I'm not afraid of what they might do to me. I've got nothing left to lose, Warren added with a grim smile. Haven't had in 15 years. Maya nodded, respect evident in her eyes. Then let's do this. I'll need copies of all the evidence, the video, the surveillance footage, the altered reports, and I'll want interviews with both of you. There's one more thing, Dominic said, reaching into his briefcase. I received this anonymously yesterday. He handed over a flash drive. It contains internal communications from the police department immediately following Nina's shooting. Someone on the inside wants the truth to come out. Maya accepted the drive with the careful reverence of a journalist receiving a bombshell. I'll need time to verify everything to make sure we're bulletproof legally before we publish. Of course, Dominic agreed. But we need to move quickly. The longer we wait, the more opportunity they have to bury this deeper. As the meeting concluded and they prepared to leave separately using different exits to avoid being seen together, Warren approached Dominic. Judge Thompson, he said quietly, there's something I haven't told you. After the shooting, I uploaded the video to a secure server with instructions. If anything happens to me, it automatically goes live on every social media platform I could think of with a detailed account of what happened. Dominic clasped the man's shoulder. Smart precaution, but let's hope it doesn't come to that. Warren nodded, then hesitated before adding, How is Nina doing? A shadow crossed Dominic's face. Physically, she's recovering, but she still hasn't spoken. The doctors say she's experiencing traumatic mutism, her mind's way of protecting itself from the horror of what happened. She'll find her voice again, Warren said with quiet certainty. When she's ready, when she feels safe. Dominic wished he shared the man's confidence. Right now, with the system arrayed against them, he wasn't sure any of them would ever truly feel safe again. Jake Peterson sat in the darkened IT department of the police station, his screen the only source of light in the room. As a systems analyst responsible for maintaining the department's computer network, Jake had access to virtually every piece of digital information that flowed through the precinct, including the chat logs and text messages sent through department-issued devices. Jake had never considered himself particularly brave or principled. He did his job, collected his paycheck, and tried to stay out of office politics. But 3 days ago, while performing routine maintenance on the backup server, he had stumbled across something that made his blood run cold. A series of messages sent by Officer Eric Sullivan to 3 other officers in the hours following the shooting of Nina Thompson. Target neutralized, Judge will think twice now. Kid screamed like an animal. Blood looked pretty good on the sidewalk. Relax, report's already sanitized. Just another nameless perp as far as the system's concerned. Jake had nearly vomited when he read the messages. He had a daughter himself, just a year younger than Nina Thompson. The casual cruelty, the deliberate targeting of a child to punish her father, the evident pleasure Sullivan took in her pain, it was beyond comprehension. For 3 days, Jake had wrestled with his conscience. Reporting what he'd found through official channels seemed futile. The same system that had already moved to protect Sullivan would surely bury this evidence as well. Going public would mean the end of his career, possibly worse. But the thought of his own daughter, the knowledge that men like Sullivan were armed and empowered by the badge they carried, had finally pushed him to act. He had anonymously forwarded the message logs to Judge Thompson and to a contact in the district attorney's office. And now he was copying every piece of evidence he could find to an encrypted external drive insurance in case the worst happened. The door to the IT department swung open, suddenly flooding the room with light from the hallway. Jake quickly minimized his screen, heart hammering in his chest. Lieutenant Richard Davis stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. Davis was a 20-year veteran of the force, respected and feared in equal measure for his rigid adherence to protocol. "Working late, Peterson?" Davis asked, stepping into the room. Jake forced a casual shrug. "System updates, less disruption if I do them after hours." Davis nodded, seemingly satisfied with the explanation. He moved further into the room, his gaze sweeping across the banks of servers and monitors. "Dedication, I like that." Jake managed a tight smile, hyper-aware of the external drive still connected to his computer, still copying incriminating files. "Just doing my job, sir." Davis stopped directly behind Jake's chair, close enough that Jake could smell the coffee on his breath. "Your job," he repeated thoughtfully. "And what exactly would you say that job entails, Peterson?" Warning bells clanged in Jake's mind. This wasn't casual conversation. "System maintenance, network security, data management," he recited. "The usual IT stuff." "Data management?" Davis echoed. "That would include maintaining the integrity of department communications, wouldn't it? Ensuring that private messages remain private?" Jake's mouth went dry. "Yes, sir." Davis leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Then perhaps you can explain why Officer Sullivan's private messages were forwarded outside the department network yesterday afternoon, from this terminal." Jake felt the blood drain from his face. He'd been careful routing through proxies, masking his digital footprint, but evidently not careful enough. Or perhaps there was another monitoring system he hadn't known about. "I don't know what you're talking about, sir." Jake tried the lie, sounding hollow even to his own ears. Davis straightened, his expression hardening. "Don't insult my intelligence, Peterson. We know it was you. The only question now is how deep this goes. Who else have you been feeding information to?" Jake's mind raced. Deny everything. Confess but refuse to implicate others. Run before he could decide on a course of action. Davis reached past him and ejected the external drive, pocketing it smoothly. "Evidence," he said by way of explanation. "You're suspended pending investigation for violation of department confidentiality protocols and potential theft of sensitive information." He gestured toward the door. "Security will escort you out. Don't bother taking anything with you. Your access credentials have already been revoked." As if on cue, 2 security officers appeared in the doorway. Jake stood slowly, his legs unsteady beneath him. "Lieutenant," he began, not even sure what he planned to say. Davis cut him off. "Save it for the hearing, Peterson. If I were you, I'd start looking for a good lawyer." As Jake was led away, the weight of what had just happened settled over him like a shroud. His career was over, his reputation destroyed, possibly his freedom at risk if they decided to pursue criminal charges. And yet, despite the fear coursing through him, there was also a strange sense of relief. The truth was out now, beyond his control. Whatever happened next, he had done what his conscience demanded. He only hoped it would make a difference. 2 days later, Maya Wilson's independent news platform published a story that sent shockwaves through the city. "Justice erased systematic cover-up of police violence against minority children." The article began with Warren's video of Nina's shooting, followed by a meticulous presentation of evidence showing the subsequent cover-up. It expanded to reveal the broader pattern: hundreds of similar cases where children's identities had been systematically erased from official reports, converting traumatized victims into faceless suspects and perpetrators. The piece included quotes from both Dominic Thompson and Warren Ellis, as well as excerpts from the leaked text messages showing Sullivan's callous celebration of Nina's suffering. It concluded with a call for a federal investigation into the department's practices and an independent review of all cases involving minors and police use of force. Within hours, the story had been picked up by national news outlets. By the end of the day, protesters had gathered outside police headquarters, many carrying purple pencils or wearing purple ribbons in solidarity with Nina. Social media erupted with the hashtag #HerNameIsNina, as people shared their own stories of encounters with police where children's humanity had been erased or diminished. The department's initial response was predictable: a blanket denial, claims of isolated incidents being misrepresented, promises of internal review. But as the evidence mounted and public pressure intensified, cracks began to appear in the unified front. In Nina's bedroom, converted from Dominic's study, the television played softly in the background as Vanessa helped her daughter with gentle range of motion exercises for her injured knee. On screen, protesters marched with signs bearing Nina's name and image, many holding purple pencils aloft like tiny beacons. Nina watched the screen intently, her expression solemn beyond her years. She reached for her whiteboard and wrote, "They're all there because of me." Vanessa paused the exercises, sitting beside her daughter on the bed. "They're there because what happened to you was wrong, and they want to help make sure it doesn't happen to other children." Nina considered this, then wrote, "Do the other children have names too?" The question, so simple yet so profound, brought tears to Vanessa's eyes. "Yes, baby. Every single one of them has a name. A family dreams and hopes just like you. And that's what your father is fighting for, to make sure those names are heard and remembered." Mashururi. Nina nodded slowly, her gaze returning to the television where a reporter was interviewing a mother whose son had been injured in a similar incident 2 years earlier. The woman wore a purple ribbon pinned to her blouse, the symbol that had begun with Vanessa and had now spread across the city. After a moment, Nina wrote something else. "I want to help too." Vanessa kissed her daughter's forehead. "You already are, sweetheart. Your courage is helping more than you know." Lieutenant Richard Davis sat alone in his office, blinds drawn against the protesters gathered outside the precinct. On his desk lay his badge and service weapon, placed there with careful precision. For 23 years, Davis had served the department. He had risen through the ranks through discipline and dedication, had trained younger officers in proper procedure, had prided himself on doing things by the book. And somewhere along the way, he had become complicit in a system that erased children's names from reports to make the statistics more palatable, that protected officers who abused their power, that valued the shield over the people it was meant to protect. The Thompson case had been the breaking point. Davis had not been directly involved in the shooting or its immediate aftermath, but he had seen the system mobilized to protect Sullivan. He had watched as Nina's name was stripped from the reports, as evidence was manipulated or suppressed, as the narrative was constructed to justify the unjustifiable. And he had known with a certainty that left no room for doubt that he could no longer be part of it. The knock on his door was expected. "Enter," he called, not bothering to look up. Chief Wilson stepped into the office, his face flushed with anger. "Davis, what the hell is this? I'm hearing about you agreeing to testify for the Thompson family. Have you lost your mind?" Davis met his superior's gaze steadily. "No, sir. I believe I've finally found it." "Do you have any idea what this will do to the department? To morale? To public trust?" "Public trust," Davis repeated with a bitter laugh. "Sir, with all due respect, we lost the right to public trust when we started shooting children and calling them perpetrators. We lost it when we began systematically erasing their names from reports to make it easier to justify their injuries. We lost it when we chose to protect officers like Sullivan instead of the communities we're sworn to serve." The chief's face darkened further. "That's enough, Lieutenant. I'm ordering you to recant your statement and withdraw your offer to testify." Davis stood slowly, gathering his badge and weapon from the desk. "I can't do that, sir. Not and live with myself." He extended the items toward the chief. Consider this my resignation effective immediately. Chief Wilson made no move to accept the proffered badge. Think carefully about what you're doing, Davis. 23 years on the forced pension just a few years away. You're throwing it all away for what some judge's kid who was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Her name is Nina Thompson, Davis said quietly. She's 8 years old. She was riding her bicycle home from the library, and one of our officers shot her because her father did his job and sentenced a corrupt cop to prison. He placed the badge and gun on the edge of the desk. I'm not throwing away my career, sir. I'm refusing to be complicit any longer. The chief's expression hardened into something ugly. You'll regret this, Davis. When this is over, you'll have nothing. No job, no pension, no future in law enforcement anywhere. We take care of our own, but we also remember those who betray us. Is that a threat, sir? It's a reality. You're making a mistake. Davis shook his head sadly. No, sir. I believe my mistake was waiting this long to stand up for what's right. He moved toward the door, then paused. You know what the worst part is? This system, this thing we've built that erases children's names and protects their abusers, it didn't happen overnight. It happened one small compromise at a time. One report sanitized one piece of evidence, overlooked one officer protected when they should have been held accountable. And we all let it happen, including me. He opened the door where the sounds of protesters filtered in from outside. But it stops now, at least for me. Maya Wilson was in the middle of a follow-up article when her phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. Maya Wilson, she answered, distracted. Ms. Wilson, this is Lieutenant Richard Davis from the police department, former lieutenant as of about 20 minutes ago. Maya sat up straighter, instantly alert. Lieutenant Davis, what can I do for you? It's what I can do for you, Ms. Wilson. I've been with the department for 23 years. For the past 5, I've been responsible for reviewing all use of force reports before they are submitted to the database. Maya reached for her recorder. Go on. I've just resigned my position in protest of the department's handling of the Nina Thompson case and its broader pattern of erasing the identities of minors involved in police incidents. I'm prepared to testify on the record about the systematic alteration of reports and the existence of what we internally call filter lingo, a set of protocols designed to sanitize incidents involving minors, particularly children of color. Maya's heart raced as she recognized the magnitude of what she was being offered. Lieutenant Davis, are you saying there's an official departmental policy to remove children's names from reports? Not official on paper, Davis clarified, but understood and enforced throughout the chain of command. It began as a public relations measure during an election cycle when juvenile incidents were receiving negative press attention. The idea was to use more clinical detached language to minimize emotional response to these incidents. When did this start? 5 years ago, right after Commissioner Barnes took office. Maya scribbled notes frantically. And you have documentation of this? Better than that, Davis replied. I have the original reports compared with the sanitized versions, hundreds of them, each showing how a child with a name becomes an unidentified juvenile suspect or a minor perpetrator, how a toy becomes a suspected weapon, how reaching for a dropped item becomes aggressive movement toward officer. Why come forward now? Maya asked, though she already suspected the answer. Davis was silent for a moment before responding. Because I saw Nina Thompson's face on those protest signs. Because I realized that for 5 years I've been part of a system that treats children like Nina as statistics instead of human beings deserving of protection. Because I can't look in the mirror anymore if I don't do something to stop it. Maya took a deep breath, steadying herself against the emotion in the veteran officer's voice. Lieutenant Davis, what you're offering could break this case wide open. It could lead to real change in how police interact with minors, especially children of color. That's the hope, Davis agreed. But Ms. Wilson, you should know, coming forward like this puts a target on my back. The department protects its own, but it also punishes those it sees as traitors. Are you prepared for the backlash? Davis's voice hardened with resolve. Ms. Wilson, I've spent 23 years behind a badge. I've faced armed suspects and walked into buildings not knowing if I'd walk back out. The thought of my former colleagues' disapproval doesn't frighten me. What frightens me is the thought of another child like Nina Thompson being shot and then erased from the records as if they never existed. When can we meet? Maya asked, already mentally revising her article to include this bombshell testimony. I'm free now, Davis replied. And Ms. Wilson, there's something else you should know. The filter lingo system wasn't just developed organically within the department. It was created by a specialized software team at the request of city officials specifically to manage public perception ahead of election cycles. This goes beyond the police department. It implicates people at every level of city government. Maya felt a chill run down her spine. The story was growing larger, more far-reaching than she had initially imagined. I'll text you an address, she said. Come alone and make sure you're not followed. As she ended the call, Maya sat back in her chair, momentarily overwhelmed by the implications. This wasn't just about one officer with a grudge, or even a departmental cover-up. This was systemic, a deliberate, coordinated effort across multiple agencies to dehumanize children of color when they became victims of police violence. She reached for her phone again, dialing Dominic Thompson's number. He needed to know what was happening, and they needed to prepare for the storm that was about to break. In a conference room at City Hall, emergency meetings had been convened to address the growing crisis. Commissioner Barnes paced the length of the table, his face flushed with anger. This is a disaster, he snapped. First the Thompson girl, then that homeless veterans video. Now Davis going rogue with his wild accusations. We need to get ahead of this before it completely spirals out of control. The city's public relations director, a sleek woman in her 40s, nodded in agreement. We're drafting a statement now expressing concern over the Thompson incident, while emphasizing that it's an isolated case being fully investigated. We'll announce a task force to review procedures. That's not enough, the mayor interrupted, his expression grave. Have you seen the protests? They're growing by the hour. This isn't going away with a press release and a symbolic task force. What do you suggest then? Barnes demanded. That we throw Sullivan under the bus. He's already lawyered up. If we don't back him, he's threatening to talk about the filter lingo system and how it was implemented under your administration. The mayor's face paled slightly. That system was never meant to cover up incidents like this. It was designed to manage public perception during a time of heightened tensions. By erasing children's names from official reports, the city attorney interjected dryly. I warned you at the time that this could come back to haunt us. Categorizing minors as subjects or perpetrators might make the statistics more palatable for press conferences, but it creates a paper trail of dehumanization that's indefensible in court. The public won't understand the nuance, the PR director insisted. They'll see it as a conspiracy to cover up police violence against children, which is exactly how the Thompson family's lawyer will present it. Because that's exactly what it became, the city attorney replied sharply. Whatever the original intent, the system evolved into a mechanism for justifying and concealing the unjustifiable. And now we have Lieutenant Davis with his impeccable record and 23 years of credibility prepared to testify to that effect. The room fell silent as the full implications sank in. Finally, the mayor spoke, his voice subdued. What are our options here legally, politically? The city attorney sighed heavily. Legally, we're exposed on multiple fronts. The Thompson family has grounds for a massive civil suit. If the federal authorities get involved, which seems increasingly likely given the evidence of systematic civil rights violations, we could be looking at criminal charges for those directly involved in implementing and maintaining the filter lingo system. And politically, the mayor pressed, politically, you need to distance yourself from this as quickly and completely as possible. Full transparency, full cooperation with any investigation. Throw your support behind reforms behind the Thompson family. Make it clear that while this happened on your watch, it was without your knowledge or approval. That's not entirely true, the mayor muttered. It needs to be your truth now, the attorney replied firmly. Otherwise, your career is over, and you could be facing worse than political fallout. As the discussion continued, none of them noticed the small recording device concealed beneath the conference table, its tiny red light blinking steadily as it captured every word. In the Thompson household, Dominic sat at the kitchen table with Maya Wilson and Lieutenant Davis, reviewing the evidence they had amassed. Warren Ellis stood by the window, keeping watch, a habit born of years of vigilance on the streets. With Davis's testimony and documentation, We can prove not just that Nina's shooting was covered up, but that there's been a systematic effort to erase the identities of children of color involved in police incidents. Maya explained, her voice tight with controlled excitement. This isn't just about one bad officer or one department's internal culture. This is policy implemented from the top down. Dominic nodded grimly. The question now is how to proceed. A civil suit is the obvious route, but I'm more interested in systemic change than financial compensation. The civil suit gives you leverage, Davis pointed out. It forces discovery, puts people under oath, creates a public record that can't be easily buried or denied. And the media coverage keeps the pressure on, Maya added. Public outrage is already forcing the department to respond. With Davis's evidence, that pressure will only intensify. Dominic rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of responsibility. What had begun as a quest for justice for Nina had expanded into something much larger, a potential reckoning for an entire system built on dehumanization and denial. What about criminal charges? Warren asked from his position by the window. Sullivan shot a child deliberately. That's assault with a deadly weapon at minimum. Davis shook his head regretfully. The district attorney's office has already declined to press charges, citing insufficient evidence of criminal intent. They're part of the same system with the same incentives to protect the status quo. Then we go federal, Dominic decided. Civil rights violations, conspiracy to deprive citizens of their constitutional rights, obstruction of justice. The evidence is clear enough to warrant a Justice Department investigation. The discussion was interrupted by the soft sound of movement at the doorway. They looked up to see Vanessa standing there, her expression a mixture of determination and worry. Nina wants to see you all, she said simply. She has something to show you. They followed her to Nina's room, where the little girl sat propped against her pillows, a large sketch pad balanced on her lap. When they entered, she looked up, her eyes solemn but clear. Nina had been drawing. The page before her showed a series of children's faces, different ages, different features, but all rendered with the careful attention of a child artist. Beneath each face was a name written in purple pencil: Alicia Ellis, Marcus Johnson, Tyrone Williams, Sophia Martinez, dozens of them filling the page. At the top, in careful block letters, Nina had written, "Their names matter." Warren was the first to understand. "These are the other children," he said softly, "the ones whose names were erased from the reports." Nina nodded, then turned the page to reveal another drawing, this one of a child's hand holding a purple pencil. Below it, she had written, "My name is Nina Thompson." "Oh, sweetheart," Dominic whispered, moving to her side. "This is beautiful." Nina turned another page. This drawing showed a courtroom with a small figure standing before a judge's bench. The figure's leg was bandaged, but she stood tall, a purple pencil in her hand like a sword of truth. At the bottom of the page, Nina had written words that sent a chill through every adult in the room. "I want to testify." Dominic exchanged a look with Vanessa, whose eyes shimmered with tears. "Nina, are you sure?" he asked gently. "You don't have to do this. We can fight this battle for you." Nina shook her head firmly and pointed to the drawing again, then to herself, her expression resolute beyond her years. In that moment, something shifted in the atmosphere of the room, a sense of purpose, of clarity. This child, rendered voiceless by trauma, had found another way to speak, and what she had to say might just change everything. "All right," Dominic said finally, his voice thick with emotion. "If you're sure this is what you want, we'll make it happen. Your voice, in whatever form it takes, deserves to be heard." Nina smiled, then a small but genuine expression that they hadn't seen since before the shooting. She reached for her whiteboard and wrote a single sentence. "The pencil is mightier than the gun." The hearing room buzzed with tension. Television cameras lined the back wall, their red lights blinking like mechanical eyes. Every seat was filled, journalists, activists, concerned citizens, all drawn by the story that had captivated the nation over the past 3 weeks. At the center table sat Dominic Thompson, no longer in his judge's robes, but in a simple charcoal suit. Beside him, his attorney arranged documents with methodical precision. Across the aisle, representatives from the police department and city government huddled in tense consultation, their faces grim. Commissioner Barnes leaned toward the city attorney, his voice a harsh whisper. "This is a circus. We should have settled." They refused, the attorney replied tersely. Judge Thompson was very clear this isn't about money. It's about systemic change. Barnes's face darkened. He's going to burn the whole department down out of vengeance. Aaron, no, the attorney corrected. He's going to expose what we've been doing for years. There's a difference. At the back of the room, Warren Ellis slipped in quietly, taking a seat near the exit. Despite the formal setting, he wore the same weather jacket he'd worn the day of the shooting, now clean, but still bearing the faint shadow of Nina's blood on the sleeve. He had refused to wash it away completely, a reminder of his purpose. Maya Wilson sat in the press section, her laptop open, fingers poised to document every word. In the 3 weeks since she'd broken the story, her independent platform had gained national attention. What had begun as one family's fight for justice had expanded into an examination of how systems of power shield themselves from accountability at the expense of the most vulnerable. The side door opened and Lieutenant Richard Davis entered. He had aged visibly in the weeks since his resignation, the stress of standing against former colleagues etched in the lines of his face. But his posture remained military straight, his gaze unwavering as he took his seat near Dominic. A hush fell over the room as the panel of investigators filed in 3 federal officials appointed to examine the evidence of systematic civil rights violations within the city's police department. The chairwoman, a stern-faced woman with silver-streaked hair, called the hearing to order. Today we continue our investigation into allegations of systematic misconduct within the police department regarding incidents involving minors, particularly children of color, she began. We will hear testimony from several witnesses, beginning with former Judge Dominic Thompson, father of Nina Thompson, whose shooting 3 weeks ago brought these issues to light. Dominic rose and moved to the witness table. After being sworn in, he faced the panel with composed dignity. Mr. Thompson, the chairwoman began, we understand that you're here today, not in your capacity as a federal judge, a position you've temporarily stepped away from, but as a private citizen, and more importantly, as a father. Is that correct? Yes, ma'am, Dominic replied, his voice steady. I'm here as Nina Thompson's father. Please tell us in your own words what happened to your daughter on May 7th and what you've discovered in the weeks since. Dominic took a deep breath. He had rehearsed this moment countless times, had prepared detailed remarks about the shooting, the cover-up, the broader pattern of abuses. But sitting here now under the harsh lights with all eyes upon him, what emerged was something more raw and honest. 3 weeks ago, my 8-year-old daughter was riding her bicycle home from the library. She had a purple pencil tucked behind her ear for a science project we were supposed to build together that evening. A police officer, Eric Sullivan, stopped her. He called her a little monkey. He demanded she drop what he called her weapon, the pencil. When she tried to pick it up after accidentally dropping it, he shot her in the knee. The room was absolutely silent. What followed was not an isolated failure of one officer, but the deliberate activation of a system designed to protect itself rather than serve justice. Within 20 minutes of Nina's admission to the hospital, her name had been removed from all official reports. She became an unidentified juvenile suspect. Her pencil became a sharp implement brandished in a threatening manner. Her attempt to pick it up became aggressive movement toward officer. Dominic leaned forward slightly, his voice taking on a controlled intensity. As I investigated further as a father, not as a judge, I discovered that this erasure wasn't unique to Nina's case. It was systematic. In the past 5 years, over 300 children in our city have been injured in encounters with police. In nearly every case involving a child of color, their name was stripped from the official record. Their humanity was erased to make the statistics more palatable, to shield the department from scrutiny, to protect a system that values its own preservation above the lives and dignity of our children. He paused, collecting himself. I want to be clear about something. This isn't just about my daughter, though her suffering drives me forward. This is about every child who has been harmed and then rendered invisible by the very institutions sworn to protect them. This is about a betrayal of public trust so profound that it undermines the very foundation of justice in our community. For the next hour, Dominic methodically presented the evidence he and his allies had gathered, the altered reports, the surveillance footage showing the premeditated nature of Nina's shooting, the internal communications revealing the existence of the filter lingo system. When he finished, the chairwoman asked, "Mr. Thompson, what outcome do you hope to achieve through these proceedings?" Dominic's answer came without hesitation: accountability, transparency, and reform so deep and fundamental that no other child will ever be shot and then erased from the record as if they never existed. As Dominic returned to his seat, Lieutenant Davis was called forward. The former officer's testimony was devastating in its precision dates. Names, specific instances where reports had been altered, the exact mechanisms of the filter lingo system, and the chain of command that had implemented and maintained it. The system was initially presented as a way to manage public perception during an election cycle. Davis explained, "The software automatically replaced specific terms with more clinical language. Child became juvenile subject. Names were removed entirely. Toys or ordinary objects became suspected weapons. The human cost was deliberately obscured behind bureaucratic language." "And you participated in this system?" one of the panel members asked. Davis nodded, his expression somber. "I did. For 5 years, I reviewed reports that had been sanitized in this way, and I approved them. I told myself I was following procedure, maintaining department standards. It took seeing Nina Thompson's blood on the sidewalk for me to recognize what I had become complicit in." He removed his badge from his pocket and placed it on the table before him. "3 weeks ago, I resigned my position after 23 years of service. I could no longer wear this shield in good conscience, not when it had become a symbol of protection for those who harm children, rather than protection for the children themselves." The badge gleamed under the harsh lights, a small monument to a career ended by conscience. As the morning progressed, more witnesses took the stand. Jake Peterson, who had exposed Sullivan's disturbing messages. Parents of other children who had been injured and then renamed as suspects in official reports. Experts in policing and civil rights who placed these incidents in the context of broader systemic issues. Throughout it all, Commissioner Barnes and the other department representatives grew increasingly tense, their whispered conferences more urgent. They had come prepared to defend against accusations about Nina's shooting as an isolated incident. The breadth and depth of evidence showing a years-long pattern of deliberate erasure had caught them off guard. During a brief recess, Barnes approached the city attorney in the hallway. "This is worse than we anticipated," he muttered. "We need to consider damage control." "It's too late for damage control," the attorney replied wearily. "The best we can hope for now is to demonstrate willingness to reform. Contrition might save some careers, including yours." Barnes scoffed. Contrition for following established protocols to manage public perception? For systematically erasing the identities of injured children? The attorney corrected sharply. For creating a culture where an officer felt empowered to shoot an 8-year-old girl over a pencil? That's what the public sees, Commissioner. That's what these proceedings are exposing. Before Barnes could respond, a commotion near the hearing room doors drew their attention. Vanessa Thompson had arrived with Nina. The little girl was in a wheelchair, her injured leg extended before her. She wore a simple blue dress, her hair pulled back with a purple ribbon that matched the pencil she clutched in her small hand. Her face was solemn, composed beyond her years. Beside her, Vanessa stood protective and resolute, the purple ribbon pinned to her lapel, catching the light as she moved. Together, they made their way toward the hearing room, a path clearing before them as conversations hushed and heads turned. Barnes watched them pass, his face draining of color. In all the strategy sessions, all the damage control planning, they had somehow failed to prepare for the most devastating evidence of all the physical presence of the child whose name they had tried to erase. When the hearing reconvened, the chairwoman addressed the room. "We have been informed that Nina Thompson, accompanied by her mother, has arrived and wishes to address this panel. Given her age and the trauma she has experienced, we have made special accommodations for her testimony." A ripple of surprise moved through the audience. Nina had not spoken a word since the shooting. How would she testify? Dominic stood. "Madam Chairwoman, my daughter has been experiencing traumatic mutism since the incident. She communicates through writing and drawing. With the panel's permission, she would like to present her testimony in a somewhat unconventional format." The chairwoman nodded. "Of course. This panel is committed to hearing Ms. Thompson's testimony in whatever form she is able to provide it." The side door opened and Vanessa wheeled Nina into the hearing room. The camera swiveled to capture her entrance, but Nina's gaze remained steady focused straight ahead as she was positioned before the panel. Nina, the chairwoman said gently, thank you for coming today. We understand that this is difficult and we appreciate your courage. Your father has explained that you're not speaking verbally right now. That's completely okay. You can share your thoughts with us in whatever way feels comfortable. Nina nodded, then looked to her mother. Vanessa placed a large portfolio on Nina's lap. The little girl opened it, revealing the drawings she had created, the faces and names of children who had been erased from reports, the image of herself holding the purple pencil, the courtroom scene with her standing tall despite her injury. One by one, Nina held up the drawings for the panel and cameras to see. Each told part of the story, her story, and the stories of hundreds of other children like her. When she had shown all her drawings, Nina took out a folded piece of paper from the portfolio. She handed it to her mother, who read aloud. My name is Nina Thompson. I am 8 years old. 3 weeks ago, a police officer shot me while I was riding my bicycle home. He called me names. He said my pencil was a weapon. When I dropped it and tried to pick it up, he shot me. After I was hurt, they tried to erase my name. They called me a suspect instead of a girl. They said I was aggressive when I was just scared. They made it sound like what happened to me was my fault. I stopped talking after that day. The doctors say it's because I'm scared and sad. But maybe it's also because I saw what happens when you have a voice in this world. Sometimes people try to take it away. But even without words, I can still speak. I can still tell the truth about what happened to me and to other kids like me. Their names matter too. All of our names matter. The policeman had a gun. I had a pencil. His gun could hurt me, but my pencil can tell my story. And stories can change things, my dad says. I hope he's right. There wasn't a dry eye in the hearing room when Vanessa finished reading. The chairwoman cleared her throat, visibly moved. Thank you, Nina. Your courage today is remarkable. Nina wasn't finished, though. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the purple pencil, not a new one, but the same one from the day of the shooting, now broken in half and stained with her blood. She held it up for everyone to see. Then, in a gesture that would be replayed on news broadcasts across the country, Nina wheeled herself to the large map of the city mounted on the wall behind the panel. With deliberate care, she reached up and pressed the broken pencil into the map, marking the exact location where she had been shot. She turned back to face the room, her expression solemn but determined. And then, for the first time in 3 weeks, Nina Thompson spoke aloud, her voice small but clear in the hushed room. This is my testimony. The simple declaration hung in the air, powerful in its brevity and authenticity. It was the voice of a child reclaiming her narrative, refusing to be erased or silenced. In that moment, Nina Thompson was not just speaking for herself, but for every child whose name had been stripped from the records, whose humanity had been denied by the very systems meant to protect them. Warren Ellis, watching from the back of the room, felt tears tracking down his weathered cheeks. In Nina's voice, he heard echoes of his daughter Alicia, the voice she had never been able to raise in her own defense, the voice that had been silenced permanently. Maya Wilson's fingers flew across her keyboard, capturing the moment in words that would reach millions within hours. Lieutenant Davis sat with his head bowed, his own complicity in the system weighing heavy on his conscience, even as he found hope in this child's courage. And Dominic Thompson, watching his daughter find her voice in the most powerful way possible, felt a complex mixture of pride, sorrow, and fierce determination. Nina's testimony wasn't just a personal declaration. It was a call to action that could not be ignored. The remainder of the hearing unfolded with a new energy, a sense of purpose sharpened by Nina's presence and testimony. When Commissioner Barnes took the stand, his prepared defenses about standard procedures and contextual considerations withered under questioning. Commissioner, one panel member asked, how do you reconcile the department's claims of transparency and community engagement with the systematic erasure of children's identities from official reports? Barnes shifted uncomfortably. Those procedures were implemented to standardize reporting and maintain objectivity in documentation. Objectivity, the panel member repeated. Is it your position that referring to an 8-year-old child by name somehow compromises objectivity? That's not, Barnes began, then stopped, aware of Nina's steady gaze from her position at the side of the room. The procedures were misguided. he conceded finally. Whatever their original intent, they resulted in dehumanizing the very communities we're sworn to protect. It was the first crack in the wall of institutional defense, small but significant. As the hearing continued, more followed. Officers testified about the pressure to conform to the filter lingo standards, about the culture that valued protecting the department's image over transparency and accountability. By the end of the day, the panel had heard enough to issue preliminary findings, evidence of systematic civil rights violations of deliberate concealment of a culture that prioritized self-protection over justice. They announced plans for a complete federal oversight of the department, a thorough review of all cases involving minors over the past 5 years, and immediate implementation of reforms to ensure transparency and accountability. Outside the hearing room, reporters clustered around Dominic and Vanessa as they prepared to leave with Nina. Judge Thompson one called, "What's your response to the panel's findings?" Dominic glanced at Nina, who nodded slightly, giving him permission to speak for their family. "Today marks the beginning, not the end," he said simply. "The panel's findings confirm what we've known, that what happened to Nina was not an isolated incident, but part of a pattern of systemic erasure. The real work of reform is just beginning." And Officer Sullivan, another reporter asked, "Will he face criminal charges for shooting Nina?" "That decision rests with the Justice Department now," Dominic replied. "But regardless of what happens to one officer, our focus remains on changing the system that enabled and protected him. Nina's voice and the voices of all children who have been harmed must be heard and honored in that process." As they moved toward the exit, Warren Ellis approached, keeping a respectful distance from the cameras. "Nina," he said softly, "you did good in there. Really good." "Okay." Nina smiled at him, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "Thank you for helping me that day," she said, her voice still soft but growing stronger with each word. "And for recording what happened. Without your video, they might have erased me completely." Warren knelt to her level, his weathered face solemn. "No one will ever erase you, Nina Thompson. Not while I'm around to remember." In the months that followed, the ripples from Nina's testimony spread outward, transforming from waves into currents of change. Eric Sullivan was indicted on multiple federal charges, including civil rights violations and assault with a deadly weapon. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Warren's video, the surveillance footage showing the premeditated nature of the attack. Jake Peterson's exposure of his disturbing text messages celebrating Nina's pain. At his arraignment, Sullivan maintained his innocence, claiming he had followed his training and responded to a perceived threat. But the jury shown Warren's video of a small girl reaching for a dropped pencil and then being shot rejected his defense. He was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. Commissioner Barnes resigned along with several other high-ranking officials implicated in the creation and maintenance of the filter lingo system. The department was placed under federal oversight, with Lieutenant Davis reinstated at the request of the Oversight Committee, leading a new division focused on transparency and community accountability. The city's filter lingo software was dismantled, replaced by protocols requiring full identification of all involved parties, particularly minors, and strict standards for accurately describing events without sanitizing or obscuring reality. Dominic officially resigned his position as a federal judge, choosing instead to establish an organization called Unredacted, dedicated to reviewing police reports nationwide for similar patterns of erasure and advocating for children who had been rendered invisible by the systems meant to protect them. Maya Wilson's independent news platform expanded, securing funding to hire additional journalists focused specifically on investigating systemic abuses of power. Her series on Nina's case and its broader implications won national awards and was being developed into a documentary. Warren Ellis, at Dominic and Vanessa's insistence, accepted their help in securing stable housing and medical care. For the first time in 15 years, he had an address, a bed, regular meals. The nightmares didn't stop entirely, but they came less frequently. Sometimes now, when he dreamed of Alicia, she was smiling. 1 year after the shooting, on a bright spring morning, a crowd gathered for the dedication of a new elementary school, built on the site of an abandoned lot not far from where Nina had been shot. The school had no fences surrounding it, a deliberate choice by the designers and community advocates who had worked together on the project. Nina Thompson Elementary School. Read the sign above the entrance, the letters gleaming in the sunlight. Beneath it, a smaller plaque bore the words, "Where every child has a name, a voice, and a future." Nina herself, now 9 years old, sat in the front row for the ceremony. Her leg, after multiple surgeries and intensive physical therapy, was healing well. She still walked with a slight limp, and likely always would, but she had regained most of her mobility. The external scars were fading. The internal ones took longer, but those too were slowly healing. She had returned to school, a different one for now, and was once again excelling in her beloved science classes. The solar system project she and her father had planned to build the night of the shooting had finally been completed and had won first prize in the school's science fair. Dominic stood at the podium addressing the gathered crowd. "1 year ago, my daughter Nina was silenced first by a bullet, then by a system designed to erase her identity and diminish her humanity. Today we reclaim that ground in her name, establishing a place where children's voices are cherished and amplified, where their names are honored, where their futures are prioritized above all else." He gestured to the simple, beautiful building behind him. "This school represents our community's commitment to protecting and nurturing all our children with the respect and care they deserve. It stands as a monument not to what was lost, but to what was found in the aftermath of tragedy, our collective voice, our shared determination to create change." After the formal dedication, as the crowd dispersed to tour the new facility, Warren Ellis approached Nina, who was admiring the colorful mural painted across the school's entrance wall, a vibrant depiction of children of all backgrounds, engaged in learning, exploration, and play. "What do you think?" he asked, nodding toward the building that bore her name. Nina considered the question seriously. "It's good," she said finally. "But it's not just for me. It's for Alicia, too. And for all the others whose names they tried to erase." Warren felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Your dad told you about Alicia?" Nina nodded. "He said she was 17 and had a beautiful smile. He said you miss her every day." "I do," Warren acknowledged softly. "In my school," Nina said, gesturing to the building, "we're going to have a special wall with all their names. Every child who was hurt and then called a suspect or a subject instead of by their name. We're going to write their real names in purple, so no one ever forgets them." Warren swallowed hard. "Alicia would have liked that very much." A comfortable silence fell between them as they continued to admire the mural. Then Nina asked, "Are you really going to be the safety officer here?" Warren nodded. "Your parents thought I might be good at it, keeping an eye out, making sure everyone feels safe. After 15 years of watching the world from park benches, I figure I've got the experience." He smiled slightly. "Plus, it comes with an apartment right near the school. First time in a long time, I'll have a real home." "That's good," Nina said decisively. "You should have a home." Across the schoolyard, Dominic watched their conversation with a sense of quiet satisfaction. The past year had been challenging beyond anything he could have imagined. The pain of Nina's injury, the struggle for justice, the decision to leave the bench, the building of Unredacted from the ground up. But in moments like this, he could see the meaning in it all, the purpose that had emerged from pain. Vanessa joined him, slipping her hand into his. She still wore the purple ribbon on her lapel, as did many in the community, a simple symbol that had come to represent the movement for transparency and accountability that had grown from Nina's case. "She's doing well today," Vanessa observed, watching their daughter. Dominic nodded. "She's stronger than I ever imagined." "Then we all are," Vanessa corrected gently. "It would have been easier to settle to take the money they offered and try to move on quietly. You chose the harder path. We all did." "It was the only path that honored what happened to her," Dominic replied. "The only one that acknowledged the truth that this was never just about Nina, but about all the children whose names were erased, whose humanity was denied." They watched as Nina and Warren moved toward the entrance of the school, joining a tour led by the new principal. Nina's limp was noticeable, but didn't slow her down as she eagerly pointed out features of the building to Warren, her face animated with excitement. "Do you regret it?" Vanessa asked suddenly. "Leaving the bench. You worked your entire career to get there." Dominic considered the question seriously. "No," he said finally. "As a judge, I was limited by the law as written by the cases that came before me, by the constraints of the system itself. With Unredacted, we're working to change the system from the outside to make it just more humane, more worthy of the people it's meant to serve. He squeezed her hand. Besides, how could I sit in judgment of others when I failed to see what was happening right in front of me all those years on the bench, and I never questioned why the reports referred to children as subjects or perpetrators. I accepted the sanitized language, the erasure of humanity. I was complicit even if I didn't realize it. You're making amends now, Vanessa reminded him gently, and helping others do the same. Inside the school, the tour had reached the main classroom area. Through the windows, Dominic and Vanessa could see Nina moving from room to room, inspecting everything, with the serious attention to detail that had always characterized her approach to learning. In one classroom, she paused at the whiteboard mounted on the front wall. After a moment's hesitation, she picked up a purple marker and wrote in large, clear letters, "Purple pencils aren't sharp, they don't kill, but silence can." The teacher leading the tour read the message and nodded, leaving it there for future students to see. Nina smiled, a full, unguarded smile that had once been commonplace, but now emerged more rarely, making it all the more precious when it appeared. Outside, the sun caught the bronze letters of the school's name, making them shine like a promise. Nina Thompson Elementary School stood as a testament to a community's commitment to change, to a system slowly reforming itself, to the power of one child's voice, and to all the voices that had been silenced before hers. The scar on Nina's knee would always remain a permanent reminder of a moment when the world had revealed its capacity for senseless cruelty. But scars also mark points of healing, of skin knitted back together stronger than before. And sometimes the deepest wounds can become the most powerful sources of change. As Nina emerged from the school building, her face turned upward toward the sun, Dominic was reminded of something Warren had said to them in the hospital 1 year and a lifetime ago. She'll find her voice again when she's ready, when she feels safe. Nina had found her voice not just for herself, but for all the children whose names had been erased, whose humanity had been denied. And in doing so, she had helped create a world where they all might feel a little safer, a little more, seen, a little more valued in their complete and perfect humanity. It wasn't a perfect world, not yet. There was still so much work to be done, so many systems to reform, so many mindsets to change. But as Nina walked toward them, purple ribbon in her hair and determination in her step, Dominic and Vanessa knew one thing with absolute certainty. The world was listening now. And Nina Thompson, along with all the children whose names were finally being spoken aloud, had a great deal to say. On the first day of classes at Nina Thompson Elementary School, Warren Ellis arrived early to take up his position at the main entrance. His security uniform was crisp and new, his badge polished to a shine. For the first time in 15 years, he had slept through the night without nightmares, without clutching his backpack like a lifeline. "First day jitters?" the principal asked kindly, noticing his vigilant stance. Warren smiled slightly. "Just want to make sure everything's perfect. These kids deserve that." The first school buses began to arrive, disgorging excited children who raced toward the entrance, backpacks bouncing. Warren watched them with a protective eye, noting each face, each name called out in greeting. In every child he saw echoes of Alicia, of Nina, the future that could be stolen in an instant, the potential that deserved to be nurtured and protected. Near the end of the morning rush, a familiar car pulled up. Dominic Thompson emerged from the driver's seat, circling around to open the passenger door for Nina. She stepped out carefully, adjusting her purple backpack. Her limp was barely noticeable now, though Warren knew the pain still troubled her on cold or rainy days. "Officer Ellis?" she called, spotting him at his post. She hurried over, her face bright with excitement. "It's the first day." "I see that," Warren replied, smiling at her enthusiasm. "All ready for class." Nina nodded emphatically. "I'm going to be in Ms. Rodriguez's class. She used to be a scientist before she became a teacher. Dad says I can show her my solar system model tomorrow." "She'll love it," Warren assured her. "Best solar system model I've ever seen." Dominic approached, extending his hand to Warren. "How's it feel first day on the new job?" Warren shook his hand firmly. "Good. Really good. Thank you again for—" Dominic waved away his thanks. "You earned this, Warren. More than earned it." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken when Nina tugged at Warren's sleeve. "I want to show you something before I go to class," she said. "It's in the main hall." Curious, Warren followed as Nina led him through the entrance and into the school's central corridor. There, covering one wall, was the memorial she had described to him at the dedication ceremony, a beautiful mural bearing the names of children who had been injured in police encounters and then erased from official records. Each name was written in vibrant purple surrounded by symbols representing the child's interests or dreams. At the center of the mural, larger than the others, was the name Alicia Ellis, with the date of her birth and death surrounded by musical notes Warren had mentioned once that his daughter had loved to sing. Beside it was a simple quotation: "They tried to bury us. They didn't know we were seeds." Warren stood motionless before the mural, overcome with emotion. For 15 years he had carried Alicia's memory alone, her name unspoken by anyone but him, her death unmarked except in his heart. And now here she was, remembered publicly, her identity honored, her humanity acknowledged. "Do you like it?" Nina asked softly, watching his face. Warren couldn't speak for a moment. Finally, he managed a nod. "It's perfect," he whispered. "Thank you." Nina slipped her small hand into his weathered one. "Now no one can ever erase them again," she said with the simple certainty of a child who had changed the world. "Their names are here forever." The first bell rang, signaling the start of classes. Nina gave Warren's hand a squeeze before releasing it. "I have to go now, but I'll see you after school, right?" Warren nodded, finding his voice again. "I'll be right here. Have a great first day, Nina." As she hurried off to join her classmates, Warren remained before the mural, his fingers lightly tracing Alicia's name. For the first time since her death, he felt something like peace settling over him, not erasing his grief, but transforming it into something purposeful, something that might help protect other children from similar fates. In the apartment above the school, his few belongings were already unpacked, his new life beginning to take shape. On the small desk by the window, he had placed a photograph of Alicia, the only possession he had never pawned or lost during his years on the streets. Beside it now sat a purple pencil, broken in half but carefully preserved, a gift from Nina, a symbol of their shared purpose. Warren touched the security badge on his chest, feeling its weight and meaning. For 15 years, he had carried his daughter's memory as a burden of grief and guilt. Now he would carry it as a source of strength and determination, a reason to stand guard, to bear witness, to protect the children who pass through these doors from anyone who might try to harm or erase them. Outside, the morning sun illuminated the words above the entrance: Nina Thompson Elementary School. Below it, the smaller plaque with its promise, "Where every child has a name, a voice, and a future." Warren Ellis took up his post, ready to ensure that promise was kept.